Assalamu alaikum and good evening everyone. We're here today to, well, firstly I introduce myself. I'm Paul Salahuddin Armstrong. I'm co-director of the Association of British Muslims, which is Britain's oldest extant Muslim organisation. Now, today I want to focus on the topic because we have a very important topic that we've come to discuss. We all know that there is an issue with a small minority within the Muslim community who are being radicalised, a lot of very young people. Somewhere between 500 and 1,000 from this country have travelled to Syria and Iraq to join Daesh. These are facts we cannot deny. So, what is important is we need to take ownership of this problem and come with our own responses, rather than relying upon others from outside the community who may not understand the things that we understand. And that said, there are also a lot of people within the community who have children, a lot of the parents, who are themselves surprised at the radicalisation of their own children, because it's not the message that the parents have given them. It's not the message that we teach our children as parents, because I'm a parent myself, about Islam and what Islam means. So we need to come with our own responses to these problems, try to understand the problem in more depth, and then come to the solutions ourselves. So today we have brought two honourable guests, Lord Sheikh and Dr. Khalid Zaheer, who has travelled all the way from Pakistan to be with us today. And we're going to discuss these issues from a Muslim perspective and come with our own solutions to these problems, inshallah. So without further ado, I would like to pass over to Dr. Khalid Zaheer first.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the program where I will speak before you on the subject of the ideological dimensions of radicalization and militancy. I begin in the name of the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. Radicalization and militancy is a phenomenon that has been initiated by a group of Muslims who have a certain worldview which they consider a part of their faith. They are convinced that they are fighting a holy war. Their conviction is based on certain religious arguments. If we want to deal with this issue effectively, we must understand those arguments sympathetically. We will either agree or disagree with what they're saying. We can succeed in countering their threat only if we are as genuinely convinced about truthfulness of our views as the radicals and the militants are about their views. Of course, I'm talking from a Muslim perspective. The people that are worrying us, causing difficulty for us, are fully convinced, thoroughly motivated, because they think that what they're doing is what exactly their Creator is telling them to do. We need to understand where they are coming from, and we need to make an honest assessment as to whether what they're saying is right or not. I keep telling people, if what they're saying is right, let's join them. But what they're saying is wrong, let's tell them that it's wrong, and let's tell them on the basis of the arguments that convince us. I'll just briefly mention what their understanding, their worldview is that has convinced them from within the text that what they're doing in form of militancy is what they ought to be doing as good true Muslims. One thing that they're convinced about is that Islam has come to dominate, not just ideologically, but politically. They also believe that jihad is meant to kill the polytheists and subjugate the Jews and the Christians. They are convinced that Kafirs, which normally is translated as non-Muslims, are looked down upon by God and, according to some verses, are worse than beasts. They believe from within the text that the Jews and the Christians cannot be made friends. Whoever makes them friends is a part of them. And they also think that God has promised the paradise to those who fight in his way to kill and subjugate the non-believers. Ladies and gentlemen, all these claims, they are convinced, are emerging from the text. If you present a solution which is based on your own philosophical understanding or some other presentation which is from outside the text, it will have no impact bearing whatsoever. So what needs to be done is understand what they're saying and find out whether that is exactly what the text of the Quran is saying. I would like here to present what I call a counter narrative, which I thoroughly believe is what the Quran is actually requiring Muslims to understand and believe in. There is a basic premise, principle that I would want to present to start with, and that is the Quran mentions clearly that God doesn't contradict himself. God, when he makes statements, they're always consistent. He doesn't say one thing in one passage and then goes on to say something else in another passage in a way that the two seem to be contradicting each other. So, whoever kills a human has as if killed the entire humanity, and kill the polytheists wherever you find them cannot go together. Some Jews and Christians are good humans, and Muslims can marry their women, and Muslims cannot make Jews and Christians their friends, are inconsistent expectations. No one can be forced religion down his throat, and if one leaves his religion, he should be killed, are contradictory statements. Invite others to faith wisely, and if someone makes a remark that appears to be insulting, he should be killed, cannot be the right at the same time. So, what I'm trying to point out is, if you look at the basic premise, principle, which God himself has mentioned, as a criterion, as a proof of the fact that the Quranic text is from God, he says that the principle is that you would find that the Quran doesn't contradict itself. Had it been from anyone other than God, you would have found lots of contradictions in it. So, if you find anything contradictory in the Quran, worry to resolve that contradiction. Worry for your faith to find out an understanding which is consistent, instead of acting upon one of the two possibilities within the contradictory statements, which are harsh, which are causing trouble. How can the apparent contradiction be explained? So, what I'm saying is that the militants, the radicals, are following one set of verses that they quote over and over again, and they are ignoring the other verses. The two set of verses put together are seemingly, apparently contradictory. I am going to make an attempt now to present before you an understanding wherein the two set of verses seem to be not contradictory and consistent. How can the apparent contradictions be explained? God sent messengers whom he calls Rasul, the plural is Rusul, from time to time. Each messenger delivered the message so effectively that after lapse of a God-ordained deadline, the immediate addressees of the message were punished for rejecting it by being killed, mostly through natural calamities. The nation of the last messenger, Muhammad, God's mercy upon him, alayhi salam, was inevitably to be treated likewise. He was a messenger of God, therefore his nation, the immediate addressees, had to be treated likewise. Why did it happen is a completely separate issue that can be discussed in a separate discussion meeting. But right now I'm trying to explain to you what the text is saying. The polytheists among them were killed. The aggressive enemies among people of the book were killed too. And the rest of the people of the book were allowed to survive in subjugation. Because the number of his followers was large, the divine punishment for the Prophet's enemies was inflicted through the swords of his companions. Quranic verses, you didn't kill them. Instead, it was God who killed them. God will punish them through your hands, and many other verses clearly point to that reality. Such verses and the incidents reported in ahadith, the narratives attributed to the Prophet, may God be mercy on him, were never meant to be practiced in the later times. They were meant for the era of the Messenger of God and his companions only. The universal principle is that humans cannot kill other humans. When the companions apparently killed fellow humans, they didn't kill them following a universally applicable law. It was God who killed them. Such incidents were not cases of implementation of Islamic Sharia law. These were descriptions of God's punishment, the way he earlier punished the nations of Noah, Hud, Saleh, Lut, Lot, Shuaib, and Musa, Moses alayhi salam. These incidents were an exception, not the rule. The punishments were meant for the people who were the direct addressees. Since no messenger is to come anymore, and the process of direct revelation of God's word has discontinued forever, no one is now allowed to kill others using the era-specific verses as a pretext. If Islam is to be presented in its true form as a universally applicable message of God, and Muslims are to survive with respect among the comity of nations, this reality must be properly understood and made known to everyone. At the time of the Prophet, jihad was meant to be undertaken for two purposes: annihilation of enemies of God's message and suppression of persecution, fitna. After the era of the Prophet and his companions, jihad can only be undertaken to subdue persecution and tyranny. And like punishment to criminals, it can only be undertaken by a Muslim ruler. Jihad can only be fought against combatants. No military installation can be targeted. There are thus no contradictions in the Quran and Hadith. It is a universal principle that no human can be killed except if he is a killer or guilty of creating mischief on earth. Killings other than that referred to in the Quran is specific to the era of the Messenger and his companions for inflicting God's punishment on the deniers of the truth that came to them directly from the Messenger of God. And the fate of all such people, as I mentioned earlier, was divine punishment. It was not something that was expected to be a law that would be applicable for Muslims to follow for all times to come. It is a huge blunder that has been committed by some Muslims who believe that what is mentioned in the Quranic verses requiring believers to fight against non-Muslims and kill them, it's a blunder that it has been understood to be applied to every time for all times to come. This reality has to be clarified. We need to talk to each other. We need to exchange views. And let's try to understand which point of view seems to be emerging from the Quranic text. As I said, let us never ever ignore the basic principle that whatever interpretation you come up with, it should not appear to threaten the Quranic claim of being consistent. God indeed praises some Jews and Christians, and there is no restriction on making them friends. The mention of not making friends in the Quran is relevant to the people of the book who made fun of God's message. This is something which is very clear from the very same text where the expectation of not making Jews and Christians friends is mentioned. Technically, there is an Arabic expression of two letters, alif lam, that precedes the mention of nouns Jews, al-Yahud, and Nasara, al-Nasara. It's somewhat similar to the English the, wherein if you mention the humanity or the nation, in Arabic, when a noun is preceded by alif lam, it could only mean two things. It could either mean the entire group that is represented by that noun, by that name, title, or a specific group whose specificity is clear from the context. I claim with whatever confidence I can muster up to mention that the Quran is unmistakably clear that it is actually referring to a group of Jews and Christians who were making fun of the message of God, and the Quran itself refers to them. And that is why, on the one hand, it praises lavishly some Jews and some Christians within the text. On the other, it urges the believer not to make some others friends. And as I said, it also allows Muslim men at least to get married to Jews and Christian ladies. So there seems to be a contradiction. But in reality, if you go deeper, there is no contradiction. And there are some people who are trying to make prominent the verses that seem to be more belligerent, aggressive in nature. Not only are they causing problems for the society at large, they are also causing problems for the understanding of the text. They are also threatening the Quranic principle and claim that its text is absolutely consistent. Indeed, no one can be forced the message of Islam down his throat. It's a free world. People are at liberty to accept or not to accept the message that has been presented to them. That is the principle. The mention in Hadith that the apostates, those who leave their faith, should be killed, in reality referred to the polytheists who left Islam after accepting it during the companions' time. Since they weren't allowed to survive after rejecting Islam in the first place, they were to be killed if they left the faith later. A group of people were given no choice. But you might say that in itself seems to be a contradiction. Okay, we'll deal with this question later, but a brief statement is that this liberty and freedom that has been allowed to all of us, because there is always an element of doubt. The reality is not absolutely unmistakably clear, and so long as that is what the reality is, everybody should be given the privilege to choose his, her faith, what appeals to the individual. But in certain specific eras of human history, so claims the Quran, that the reality that a certain message is from God becomes so very clear that the individuals who do not accept the invitation are actually doing it knowingly. They are therefore the kind of people who are eligible to God's punishment. But that is something which lasts for only the duration when this stipulation was meant to be implemented. Beyond that, it's a world wherein we are in competition of ideas, ideologies. We should exchange views, make presentations, respond to questions, and let the individual decide as to what point of view he feels makes him or her more comfortable. Indeed, Muslims need to invite others to their faith wisely. The mention in Ahadith of killing of some people who blasphemed is a description of the punishment given to those who rejected God's messenger and showed aggression and insulting attitude in their enmity against him. In other words, when a group of people were not allowed to remain non-believers beyond a certain time limit, if they were the ones who were involved in acts of blasphemy, they were actually declaring through their attitude that they had rejected the message which was meant to be accepted by them as a matter of compulsion. They had no choice beyond a certain deadline. Otherwise, we've got verses after verses, passages after passages in the Quran which very clearly mention the fact that there were some non-believers and then some apparent seeming believers called hypocrites who used to make fun, and they would ridicule and find opportunities to do things which would be insulting. And yet the Quran doesn't mention anywhere in response to this behavior that the Muslims should get hold of them and kill them. Instead, each of these passages urges believers to ignore, to be patient, to be steadfast. I'm not talking about the verses that were revealed in Meccan period only, wherein one might claim that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, did not enjoy the authority of an administrator. I'm talking about verses that were revealed in the Medinan period, when the Prophet had the authority as a ruler to implement the law that had come to him from God. And there are passages, if you would ask me, I will quote them, wherein we know that there were people, Muslims, apparent Muslims, in the garb of Islam, they were ridiculing Islam, and they were non-Muslims. And the Quran mentions them and says, ignore them. Don't give them company. Don't be a part of them. When you find that they're indulging in these negative activities, just remove yourself from that place, and when they stop doing it, you can join them again. That's what the Quran says. If they are making some insulting remarks, claiming that what they're doing is in actual fact something quite acceptable, do not use the language that they're employing. Remove those words from your vocabulary which are actually being used as a ploy to make those insulting remarks. But nowhere has the Quran mentioned that if you find them indulging in such activities, just get hold of them, get rid of them. Not a single passage. So there is no contradiction in the Quran, and the Quran doesn't contradict the Hadith. Both go hand in hand, and both deliver a message which is absolutely consistent as indeed promised by God. The verses referring to military and political dominance of Islam in the Quran are referring to dominance of God's message in the Arabian Peninsula and its surroundings during the Prophet's era. In the grand scheme of God, the land known as the Arabian Peninsula, was declared to be the land of God, like it was done in the case of Jerusalem, Palestine, which was given to the children of Israel. This land was assigned by God to the children of Ismail. And the verses referring to the claim that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, has come to ensure that the message dominates, is mentioning the possibility of dominance over that area. But of course, there are people who are thoroughly convinced that it actually means the entire globe. Not an inch is to be spared. And of course, that in itself is a serious bone of contention, which I am saying needs to be discussed, needs to be talked about, to find out as to which of the two possibilities is correct. The expression kafir has been used in the Quran for people who knowingly rejected the truth. A person who knows what God's message is and knows that it is coming from God and knows that he or she is expected to accept it and to submit, and then goes on to arrogantly reject it, is what a kafir is. After the divine revelation has ceased to enlighten humanity directly, no one can tell as to whether a certain person is doing knowingly or ignorantly. Whether the person who is not accepting it is not actually convinced for various reasons, for the poor performance of Muslims, for not getting answers to important questions, or whether it's a deliberate act. But one thing is absolutely clear, that the Quran uses the word kafir not just for non-Muslims, but for Muslims as well. So a kafir is an expression which is meant for the people who know what the truth is, but they're not interested. In actual fact, if you look at it, the possibility of Muslims doing it is greater, because they accept and claim that it's from God, but they go on to say that, so what? And this, of course, is something, again, which needs to be discussed. But when you use the expression indiscriminately for all non-Muslims, then the reader of the Quran has the feeling that the people whom he is dealing with are the ones who are not worthy of respect. God has indeed promised the paradise to those who do jihad in his way and kill and get killed. But such jihad has to satisfy the conditions mentioned in the Quran, referred to earlier. Otherwise, fighting to kill humans is likely to be categorized as fasad fil ard, mischief on earth. Thank you very much.
Commandments and prophetic traditions are for an era of the Prophet only and his companions. But I think I fail to understand how he substantiated from Quran, because this is something new, something maybe innovative, but innovations are not good in the religion. Secondly, Quran uses the word kafir for a Muslim. Can you give me the reference, please? And thirdly and lastly, only one supplementary question to our other fellow. You know, we all against radicalization, but the thesis may be different, and it has to be very sound grounds. On one side, ISIS is condemned, but we don't find the same condemnation for the regime, which is representing only a sect, 8 or 9%, and is brutally commencing all the atrocities. I finished.
I assume the third question is directed towards Lord Sheikh. Two references. There is a verse in the Quran, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Those who refuse to implement what God has revealed, such are the people who are indeed kafir. This verse cannot be directed towards non-Muslims. And indeed, there are a number of verses which are declaring people who were hypocrites as kafir. Indeed, all hypocrites were the ones who were believers. They recited the kalma, and yet the Quran declared that what they're saying and what they're doing is not exactly in line with what the Almighty expects from them. There are a number of other references, but let me be brief. You see, for something to be new is not a conclusive proof for it to be wrong as well. For a Muslim, and I hope that you agree with me, the basic text is the text of the Quran. The Quran makes a very clear statement, as I mentioned in my presentation, that it has got no contradictions. So if you are saying that you're not supposed to kill anyone and you are supposed to kill people, let's resolve these two apparently contradictory statements. I know, and I'm sure you're more knowledgeable than me, you also know, that when Ibrahim alayhi salam went about to slaughter his son, it was something which was specifically meant for him and nobody else. I'm sure you know better than I do that in the Quran when it mentions that Abdullah, a servant of God, was normally referred to as Khizr, when he killed a naughty boy, it was not something which was meant for anyone else to do. Likewise, there are other verses. Okay, in some cases we tend to disagree. Let's talk about them. Let's go deeper into them. Let's present and put across to all our youngsters who are inspired by these speeches, 5 speeches of their religious leaders that incline them to do this jihad that is happening right now, that do they know the other point of view, which is again emerging from the Quran? And let's agree to disagree. I'm not saying that what I'm mentioning is all absolutely correct. What I'm humbly stating is that let's, for God's sake, first try to understand